God's blessings to you as we continue our Seasons of Prayer series. So in this one, I'm going to step back a little bit rather than jumping right in with experience. That's what I chose not to start here, so that you would understand that this series is about the experience of prayer. But today we're going to step back and just ask the question, what is prayer? Ask that question, what is prayer? Just share with you the thoughts that have been helpful for me when I think about what prayer is, and to give encouragement, to know that prayer, in some ways it can become the most natural thing to do, and so to lead in that direction. And then also as a point of teaching or as a real tool for you in your prayer, I want to give simple the steps of mental prayer that were taught by St. Francis de Sales. So just a format that you can use in prayer, that you can incorporate into your own times of prayer. But back to that first question, what is prayer? You've probably heard that question answered many times throughout your life. And really, the best answer is just to say it's a conversation with God. I'm sure you've heard that way before. It's a conversation with God, where you share with God what's in your heart. You share with God, the things, the anxieties, the things you want to pray for. You share with God, the gratitude in your heart. And the other thing as a conversation, it involves both talking and listening. And so that's where we grow in prayer. We grow in our ability to listen because, God is pure spirit. He has a body in Jesus Christ, but he's pure spirit, so you don't hear God speak with your ears. So when you talk about hearing God speak, listening, it's usually more subtle. And that's where we grow in prayer. But prayer is a conversation with God, and hopefully it becomes one of the most natural things for you to do. I want to add at this time again then, what is the goal of prayer? The goal of prayer isn't, just to get what I want. God's not a vending machine, or it's not, as I said once, Jesus in my back pocket. So, I'm in trouble, I need help. Jesus, I'm going to pull you out of my back pocket. And then once everything's in control, it's like, I got this, you can go back away again. That's not prayer. Well, it's a part of prayer. And God does humble himself to answer those prayers because he loves us. But that's not the goal of prayer. The primary goal of prayer isn't to get stuff. That's part of it. But the goal of prayer is to live in relationship with God. To live in relationship with God. That's the goal of prayer. And ultimately, to arrive at union with God. That probably won't be perfected until the next life. But the goal of prayer is to live in relationship with God. It's not to get this thing or that thing that I want, although that's part of it, because when you have a friendship, when you have a relationship, you share with each other what you hope to achieve. And so you share that also with our Lord. But that's only part of prayer. And so now I want to give you things that have been helpful to me when I think about prayer. And one is, Jesus gives a parable to teach us about what kind of prayers are heard and what kind of prayers aren't heard. And so this has always been very helpful to me. It's in Luke's Gospel, but I don't recall the chapter and verse right now. But it's Jesus' parable about the tax collector and the Pharisee. So the tax collector and the Pharisee, they enter into the temple to pray. And the Pharisee is at the front of the temple, right before the altar of God, and he talks about all the great things he's doing for God. He talks about how he gives, he tithes from his income. It talks about how hard he works to keep the laws to the strictest letter, both the laws of God and the man-made laws that the Pharisees had built around the law to help them out. And he talks again and again about how good he is, looking at himself, really, So here he is. He's talking to God, but the only thing he can talk about is himself. It's the only thing he can see. There's a beautiful line in the text, and it says where the Pharisee spoke these words to himself. If you think about, if prayer is supposed to be a conversation with God, speaking the words to yourself isn't getting you where you want to be. Then Jesus continues the parable. So he says, there's the Pharisee talking about all the things that he's doing perfectly right. And he says, the tax collector was in the back of the temple, wouldn't even raise his eyes to heaven. But he beat his breast and he said, have mercy on me, a sinner. And after that, Jesus, he asks his disciples. He tells his disciples, the latter went home justified, not the former. And so that's always been very helpful for me in understanding what prayer is meant to be. And the one thing we see is that it doesn't have to be a lot of words. The prayer of the tax collector, the publican, of the sinner was, have mercy on me, Lord, a sinner. Not so many words. It doesn't have to be a lot of words. Sometimes it is. That's what comes natural to you when you speak with God. But it doesn't have to be a lot of words. But here's the more important thing about that parable with Jesus and the tax collector, is that we don't have to be perfect before we begin to pray. In fact, it'd be kind of silly if that were our expectation, because one of the most important things we ask for from God is mercy, is grace, to help us to get where we want to be. And so that's very good news. That the tax collector, the one who was notorious in his day for being a traitor of Israel, of God's people, went home justified. We don't have to be perfect before we begin to pray. And then when we look to the Pharisee, we see that it's not about scoring points. Like I said, the goal of prayer is to live in relationship with God. Let me just think about a relationship in your own life. If spouses are keeping score, they're doing something wrong. Because it's about enjoying one another's company. It's not about scoring points. Jesus said, humble yourself to serve the other. And, the Pharisee was trying to score points, and that wasn't the way. It's about relationship. It's not bragging on this or that, but just coming before the Lord saying, I'm happy about this, but I'm a little anxious about this. Come and walk with me on this road of life. And just a third thought on this parable of Jesus with the tax collector and the sinner is just the honesty in prayer. For the tax collector to say, have mercy on me, a sinner. It was quite, he wanted mercy, he asked for mercy. He didn't hide his sinfulness, but he was honest before God. And that's a lesson we see there. With this honesty in prayer, I just want to share how St. Therese of Lisieux described prayer. She described prayer as a surge of the heart toward God. A surge of the heart toward God. And that might use words, it might not. So those are some beginning thoughts on prayer. And also, I remember from our previous episode how Brother Joshua described it so perfectly as, inclining the ear of your heart. Inclining the ear of your heart to the Lord as part of this prayer. Now, in terms of things that have been helpful for me, the second thing I want to share with you is I'd heard it as a homily of my pastor of many years growing up. And so he starts the homily, he describes how a young priest. Well, I guess I'm still a young priest, but once I was a newly ordained priest, was assigned to a very rural parish. And, he would come to get things ready for the morning mass. And every morning, there was an elderly farmer. There was an old gentleman already in prayer before the priest arrived. And he was a farmer. And so finally, after being there for, a month, 2 months, the young priest went over to the old farmer and he just said, I see you here every morning. And it's wonderful that you spend this time in prayer with God, but what do you say when you're praying to God? The old farmer looks up at him and he says, "Say? I don't say anything. I look at him and he looks at me." So another way to think about prayer is, again, it's about relationship. So the elderly farmer, he just put himself in the presence of God because you want to be close to those who are your friends. You want to be close to those whom you love. And that was his manner of prayer. And I've always found that very comforting for myself. So whether you think of prayer as a surge of the heart toward God, or you think of it as being in conversation with God, or whether you think of it as gazing lovingly upon the beauty of the Lord's face, the important thing is that you take that time in prayer, that you give God that opportunity to work on you. Because after all, St. Alphonsus says, "He who prays will be saved."